And so I suppose with the first two systems, it seems to me there's a little bit of an element of the drive system maybe being a little bit like the accelerator and the soothing system maybe being a little bit like the brakes in a situation. But where does the threat system come into this?
Okay, well, normally how the threat system works is maybe like an animal. How it's meant to work is when we're under threat, for example, a deer is chased by a tiger, once the deer gets to safety and then maybe is at a watering hole, the deer will completely calm down. And so even though the deer was fighting for its life not long ago or running for its life, then soon after, there can be this balance and recuperation happening very quickly. But what can happen with people if we get our patterns out of balance? Too much drive. So getting caught up with being over-conscientious, over-ambitious, pushing ourselves too hard, working too many hours, expecting ourselves to be right on top of things, and not enough of the soothing, not enough leisure, time out, allowing oneself to be vulnerable, accepting support from others or seeking support from others, then people will be chronically stressed. And if we're chronically stressed, we're reacting as though we're continuing to be chased by a tiger or a lion. Continually there's this alarm system going off, and this would lead to the release of not only the brain neurotransmitter norepinephrine, which is related to adrenaline, but also the hormone cortisol. So cortisol is a hormone that's released which helps if we're in persistent danger in different ways, like it helps with things like blood clotting and things like that. However, if cortisol is persistent, it leads to many different types of health problems. And so part of the problem is if we're continuing the drive, not enough soothing and out of balance much of the time, then we're going to be having too much cortisol with the complications that leads to.
And so cortisol is what they refer to as the stress hormone, isn't it? So is it just persistent or long-lasting stress that leads to the release of cortisol? Or, for example, if we're like a little bit kind of stressed with work, but we've spoken a little bit on the podcast before about how you can have a little bit of good stress in some ways. So is it mainly that bad stress that's associated with cortisol release?
Yes, I think it's if we're feeling overwhelmed, if we're feeling threatened, unsafe and overwhelmed. But the problem is with human beings is if we're worried about something, and so we're persistently thinking of what might go wrong in the future. Now, it might be a financial worry or a worry about what people think of us or a worry about whether we've done a job well enough. Now, our body will not necessarily differentiate between these kind of worries or sense of threat, of disapproval or failure, and the threat of running away from a lion. So our body's got similar kind of mechanisms for dealing with repeated stress or feeling overwhelmed or a sense of threat, but this can be triggered by ongoing worries. And so if we have persistently high levels of stress, and so that tends to relate to ongoing higher levels of cortisol, that actually leads to a range of physical and mental health symptoms such as fatigue and irritability and headaches and anxiety, depression, even weight gain. But apart from that, it works the opposite to neurogenesis. For example, we've talked before how with physical exercise and also novelty or managing with moderate stress and achieving, solving problems and things like that, that actually leads to the development of new brain cells and connections between brain cells or neurogenesis. But elevated levels of cortisol actually kill off new brain cells and connections between them. So it actually interferes with our memory and learning. It works the opposite to neurogenesis. And that's where if people are chronically stressed, it'll be difficult for them to learn and retain new information.